Great. Hi everyone. We're here with Peter.
Hello.
And Steve Miller. We were at SecT, and hopefully you were listening to the other interviews, but now we have some fun stuff. Now we have some reversing of ICS network protocols, right?
Yes.
And malware for the same system.
Yeah. So my talk was really focused on my own obsession with the Triton malware, which was, as I said, first came to the public in late 2017, and it abused an ICS protocol that was, at the time proprietary, so no one really understood it. We didn't have a great understanding of how the malware used the protocol, and we wanted to get a better understanding of that, so that if they did it wrong, we could detect abuse of the protocol. So that was really kind of what kicked off the investigation. And over time, the more I looked at Triton, the more I became curious about the origin story. And everybody loves an origin story.
Sure.
You want to know how a thing, became a thing, how it was born. And so I wanted to bring more evidence to the narrative that the developers had reverse engineered some legitimate software, and so I went on kind of this quest to figure out, if that's true, which software was it, and ultimately, we were pretty lucky to, have painstakingly made our way into proving that it was from a legitimate, software application.
Yeah.
And you got fairly good indicators that they didn't really understand the protocol, both from some error cases you observed on a target device, and also the things which was badly documented in the DLLs. They renamed it to unknown in their malware.
Yeah. So even though they committed time to reverse engineering it, they didn't get everything they wanted to know. They only had some pieces of, what certain messages meant. And they obviously had to annotate a bunch of stuff over what they reverse engineered that was undocumented, even in the official support DLLs. And then the timeline of development also tells us that, they were continually working on this for over a year.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of mystery around the origin story, but we're able to add more substance to that narrative of how it was done, how long it took.
And the timing you got from some metadata from Python compilation.
Yes, the PYC, the Python bytecode files. When you decompile those, there's a piece in the beginning that says when it was compiled. So we're able to build up that.
Alright, so
And
the
correlate the build.
malware was built at different times. So did you have multiple samples of the malware?
No, well, on the engineering workstation, we only got one sample of the malware, but we can tell that there were multiple samples uploaded over time in the USN change journal. So we can see all the files. We actually have hashes of the same, what we believe is the same malware, but we never acquired the full sample.
Oh, right.
And what we're presuming is that this is a big Python project, and they have, multiple versions of different supporting scripts, and they compiled it at different times, but not all the scripts were changed. So what we were looking at in the Python metadata times were, multiple compilations of the same project.
So from your understanding, they probably didn't have the reference systems in-house and tested and developed, and because it seems like they almost tested on a live system, a target system?
That is a good question, and that is a contentious point. I think some people believe one thing and some people believe another thing. I don't think it's unreasonable to suspect that they had a physical device.
Yep.
But if they did have a physical device, we believe it was probably a different firmware version.
Yeah, so it didn't work in the live system.
So they had even if they had the network communications working perfectly, they may not have been able to get the exploit working on the victim device firmware.
Yeah.
So they had and also they had a lot of files that were associated with firmware utilities. So they were really trying to explore the firmware versions, and they were trying to dump pieces or memory from the device, and they were trying to get the firmware itself. So they were like doing a lot of stuff. They had a lot of problems with the firmware. So it's my belief that they did, if they had a physical controller, they didn't have the correct firmware version.
Cool. It's really interesting to see the methodology. This is not my field, but it's like, super nice way of going. Like, as I told you right after the talk, like, you're super lucky to have this as a job.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't have a sort of the background here. Is it known what's target?
Yeah, what the malware actually did?
Yeah, was there some known evil payload which were intended to detonate sometime, or what's?
Yes, the backdoor payload is not public.
Yeah.
Everything that the one like malware package that we have was accidentally or possibly intentionally. There's a complicated story about who uploaded it to VirusTotal, but there is a backdoor payload which was not included on VirusTotal. So only our customer knows about that. We did some reverse engineering. The long story short, it was a firmware implant designed for the controller. So there's, again, some complicated theories on what they were doing. Were they developing a capability? Were they testing a capability? Did they actually intend to disrupt the safety controller? We don't know all of those things, like true intentions, but they were definitely experimenting with the Triton framework and getting an implant on the controller, implanted backdoor.
So they used Python, and you were very successful in reverse engineering it, and that was very helpful for your analysis. So my question here is, from a malware creator's perspective, did they do something wrong either by choosing Python or the way they compile it, which simplified analysis, or would it have, you would have reached the same conclusion if it had been C code or something run from some packer obfuscator?
That's a good question. I don't think that the language or the way it was packaged really mattered too much. Obviously, when we got to the victim machine, we were lucky to get that one sample. It certainly made analysis easier that it was in plain text. Like anybody can pretty much read Python. That made analysis easier. I think we would have probably been able to figure all that stuff out. It just would have been more time consuming.
Yeah.
So if anything, it made the analysis more accessible to people of different skill levels.
Yeah.
And me being just a hobbyist reverse engineer, I can just kind of read what it does.
Yeah, I can reverse engineer too, but it
takes a long time.
It takes time. Yeah.
If it were a different type of executable, or if they had used more.
In your research, you found a lot of spelling errors, like response being spelled bad and allocate being spelled bad. And me working in Swedish companies and international companies, that seems very much like common for an international engineering firm. Mm-hmm. You don't notice Swedish characters, English characters being a little bit messed up, or many don't notice. It actually goes through code reviews where people complain about everything. They miss spelling. So the TriStation developers, is it known what country of origin those who made the original, the good DLL were?
No, I have no idea about that. But that DLL and the original Tricon controller were made by a corporation called Triconex Corporation.
Yeah.
That was sold to a bigger corporation called Invensys Corporation. And then Invensys was acquired by Schneider Electric. So we're talking about decades. We're decades away from the original development of a lot of this code. Some of this just may be lost to time.
Yeah.
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 And if you saw like some of the timestamps on the original C++,
Super
string
old,
tables,
yeah.
1999.
Yeah.
So we're almost 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember war about one word, if it should be spelled in British English or American English.
Yeah. And, the typos were one thing, but like if there were typos throughout, I don't think it would have surprised me. But it was that there were typos in that one piece of it, and the rest of it was like pretty well done.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of other inconsistencies that still drive me crazy. For example, there are a couple of people that tell me that only the first byte is the message type rather than the first 2 bytes. So, and it doesn't really matter because in all observed pieces of the protocol, the second byte has always been 0. But there are some people that believe that is another thing that was not necessarily accurate in the Triton's malware script.
Yeah.
So there's still some pieces of the protocol implementation that are unanswered, and I don't really know if that was an error in the Tricon DLL, if that was an error in the Triton, or if that's an error in the research parties, and I'm not sure where they're getting their answers from.
Yeah.
And there's some elements of also circular research, because one person learns from another person, and then we've got like people validating results that maybe came from themselves.
Yeah. Makes sense, I guess. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I think we reached the end of this. But before we go, is there something you would like to plug? Something like
personal project,
blog
webpage,
or
the best place to find the most amazing hackers,
cat pictures.
Cat pictures as well, of course.
I've started tweeting, so you can find me on Twitter. I often tweet different types of PCAP things. So if anybody wants to follow my Twitter, I'm definitely interested in network protocols. I will say again, there's so much good Triton research out there. I didn't see them, but there were a couple of really good talks at Black Hat and DEF CON about the Triton firmware implantation aspects that I think are probably going to be really interesting, and I assume there are white papers. Cool. A lot of cool people doing research on this topic. So I can't really claim any credit for any of it.
Well, sure you do.
Maybe just a small piece.
So what's your Twitter handle?
Steve Miller Time, STVE Miller Time. And I think SecT has retweeted a couple of mine. So.
They're following you for sure. So thanks for doing this interview with us.
Thank you guys.
Enjoy Sweden.
Thank you.